Dr. van der Schyff.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm well, thank you. It is
Yes.
always a very daunting experience to be scrutinized, particularly by a board of this caliber, but I'm grateful to be here. Thanks.
Tell me your LLM, this one that you got cum laude, was it through coursework or did you just go for a straight thesis?
No, it was through coursework and I did a dissertation.
On what?
The dissertation was on the nationalization of water rights.
Nationalization.
Yes.
When was that, by the way?
I hope that
2003?
Yes. I hope that I would have remembered all the information in my CV, and I'm sure it will come back. But at the
Yes.
moment, I just need to get to the CV. Then I will remember all the dates.
Yeah, just to
Yes.
be brief about it.
Yes.
In one of our smaller towns, I know of somebody who owns water rights, and he demands a higher tariff as and when he wants to. At least that's the report I got. And one day when they were not able to accept the tariff, he just shut down the water, and the whole town was without water. Could it be
Yes.
one of the reasons why you want water to be nationalized?
So I did the dissertation because, in my view, water is nationalized. If we look at the National Water Act,
Yes.
we find the concept that the state or the government actually is the trustee of all the water resources in South Africa, and that all the previous water rights that people actually thought were in private ownership
Yes.
was, whether it was or not, is irrelevant, because after the act, it clearly is not in private ownership anymore. It's an asset that belongs to the people of South Africa.
Why are people able to sell it like this? I mean, I had a discussion with the late Minister Malewa because we know the particular town together and we know the individual who owns the water rights. We've interacted with him before, and she was expressing her frustration about how this man would just close the water if he's not paid what he demands.
Yes, I think it is part of our
And she was the
previous-
Minister of Environmental
Yes.
Affairs and so on at the time.
Yes. So I think it's part of our apartheid dispensation, and particularly the emphasis that was placed on private property rights.
Yes.
I know many people in town and even on farms still think that they just have the right to bore a hole and they can extract the water.
Yes.
And it is my view that that whole dispensation was completely changed
Yes.
when the National Water Act was promulgated.
Has that understanding permeated the state machinery, or did you get a sense that even the Department of Water Affairs doesn't seem to know that it bears the responsibility to look after the water as owner on behalf of
Yes.
people, of the people?
So I think, particularly in the beginning, state departments might have been very concerned about being accused of expropriating rights
Yes.
and then having to compensate people.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the reasons why the necessary actions hasn't been taken. I mean, if you look at the National Water Act, and if you attend international conferences on the National Water Act, our act is absolutely hailed as
Yes.
one of the best acts in the world.
Yes.
And yet in South Africa we find that the benefits that are actually to be associated with the act
Yes.
does not flow, if I can use that,
Yeah, it doesn't
through
flow
to
yeah.
grassroots levels.
Well, one example that immediately, I said I was shot, but I've not been shot. One example that immediately comes to mind was when there was acute drought
Yes.
in Cape Town. Those who look like the owners of the water, the farmers,
Yes.
benevolently opened the sluice so that water could flow down to the city.
Yes.
And there was this concern as to how much of that water would still be there flowing through the river by the time it gets to Cape Town. Meaning,
Yes.
If the state knew that it owned the water, it would have long helped the people of Cape Town.
Yes.
But because the understanding is the farmers own the water, the state had no authority in its view to assist the people of Cape Town with that water.
Yes, I think one must differentiate when people accumulate water because of the water rights that they have.
Yes.
And they store that water according to the permits and the licenses that they have.
In a dam,
Yes.
can you even have a dam that you own collectively to the exclusion of the state?
I think that is a question that has a nuanced answer.
Okay.
I think that once you are allocated enough water to accumulate a lot of water in a reservoir, the first question that should be answered and asked is, why are you receiving so much water
Yes.
that you do not need to use it?
Okay. In passing, and your doctorate was on what?
So my doctorate was on the constitutionality of the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act.
MPRA.
Yeah, MPRDA. But
Yes, DA, yes.
Yes,
Do
but
you
it's-
agree with my judgment or not?
yes, you will not believe I do agree with the
Okay.
Agri-SA judgment. I agree.
You agree?
Yes.
JP, over to you.
Prof, good afternoon.
Afternoon, JP.
Or should I say Professore?
No.
You've done 48 weeks acting,
Yes.
and the last period you've been saddled with a very long, drawn-out criminal trial, am I
Yes.
correct? How are you finding your feet in this criminal trial? Because it's a foreign field for you.
Yes. It is a new field for me if you look at the acting roster. But sir, if you look at my history and the history of my practice, when I started out as an attorney in 1993, from about 1993 to the year 2000, I was actually a criminal lawyer. I did a lot of other stuff, but the bulk of my work was criminal work.
Oh, I see.
This case is a very interesting case, and it's a long case because there is a lot of accused and a lot of counsel involved.
Yeah, and you've done 2 weeks in the agent court.
Yes.
How did you find that?
Well, agent court is amazing because when you do agent court, you have to be there. You have to think while you are, well, I want to say in your feet, but actually while you are seated. I also did some other urgent matters in the first acting stint that I did. And I indicated it with a little cross on my little paper that I had on the template.
Yes.
And it was only 3 urgent matters, but I think in those 3 urgent matters, I was like eased into the urgent court. And I'm very thankful for the judge who afforded me the opportunity to do that specific urgent matters. But I found the urgent court challenging, but I enjoy it.
I see. And you've written quite a number of judgments, huh?
Yes, sir, I've written. I think
Extensively, like a true professor.
yes, I write quite a lot of
Okay.
judgments.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you. And if we combine your practical experience, it's some 16 years, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
As an attorney,
Yeah,
although there was a break in between.
yes, if I must be very honest, the time period that I was full-time,
Yes.
a full-time attorney was from 1993 until 2000.
Yes.
And then in 2001, I started to teach part-time at the university. From 2002, I was full-time employed at the university.
Yes.
But I joined a firm, and I must confess it was my father's firm.
Okay.
In the meantime, because that gave me the opportunity to keep my one foot in practice and my other foot in academia.
Yes.
But after a while, I saw it doesn't really work like that. You know, you can't serve 2 masters at the same time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to focus on academia. However, my father got very ill. He got at a specific stage, and then I had to look at his practice as well extensively for a few months until he got better. But full-time practice, it was only from 1993 until 2000.
Yes. MEC,
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Nyam.
Thank you, CJ. Afternoon, Prof.
Afternoon, sir. Thank you.
Given the current challenges of our country, I'm interested in your monograph titled Property in Mineral and Petroleum.
Yes.
How can that be used to generate a solution in the mining sector?
I think it can be used if more people buy it and read it and study what I say. The message that I want to convey in that book is the same message that I captured in my dissertation, The Nationalization of Water Rights, and it is the same message that I captured in my thesis. And that is that we are currently in a new dispensation. We are in a new South Africa, and we are developing laws that must not only suit one particular fragment of society. We are developing laws that must suit the whole nation. And in that book, I try to indicate, inter alia, there's a lot of things that I try to do, but I try to indicate how private property as an institution has actually developed since the promulgation of the Constitution, since it became our prime Constitution. But I also want to indicate how people must understand that in this new dispensation, it is not about politics. I think what was the most important thing for me that I realized while I was writing this book. In South Africa, whenever we deal with issues pertaining to resources, land, water, minerals, and we see the changes that come, particularly from the community that I represent and where I come from, and that was the previously advantaged communities. They think that all these changes is only brought about by the politics of the ANC and the politics of transformation. Now, it is indeed so. It is also brought about by transformation. But if you look at the development that is taking place worldwide, there's a book written by Kevin and Susan Gray, and it is called Land Law. And if you read that book and you look at the availability of land, if you would take all the land in the world that is quite comfortably habitable, and you would say every individual on earth should be allocated a piece, it works out, I think, at about 15 square meters per person that you can own. Now, in this dispensation, where there is so many people and the resources are limited, the question is, can we really still remain focused on this issue of private property when natural resources are concerned? And I hope that my book will bring across that message.
My last question, already we have touched the previously advantaged.
Yes.
Any significant engagement with the previously disadvantaged that will inform whatever that we have done, that stand out, that you might share with us?
That I have done? Yes. Okay. So I think the interaction that I had with previously disadvantaged and specifically historically disadvantaged people will be from a personal point of view, but also from a professional point of view. And in light of the aim of this meeting, I will focus on what I did in my professional capacity as a professional point of view. Since I joined academia, I was very involved in the mentoring of students. I was specifically in the circumstances that we were at the Potchefstroom University, and I don't know whether it's general knowledge, in 2004, there was a merger of the university in Potchefstroom and the university in Mafeking, and we became the proudly new institution, the Northwest University. But Afrikaans was always the language in which we had to teach classes, and it was the easy thing to be, and particularly in those days, most of our students were Afrikaans. But after the merger, more and more of the students from historically disadvantaged backgrounds came to Potchefstroom, and they could study there, but they still had to study in Afrikaans. And we used a very innovative system to accommodate them. There were translation while we were teaching. So I would teach a lecture, and then there will be someone translating it, and the students would be sitting there with earphones. And we all thought it worked very well because of what we were doing. And then one day a student came to me and he said to me, you know, Prof, it's very difficult in circumstances like this. And I said, but how can you complain? You have an Afrikaans study guide, but you have an English study guide. You can answer your questions in English. And then he said, yes, but you know what, Ne? It's like when you teach and you are in front of the class and you are speaking and I have to listen to somebody through headphones. It is as if I am watching television, but I am listening to the radio. And that was that was the first time that I really grasped the problem that English-speaking students from historically disadvantaged communities must experience in relation to language. So what I did then in my own personal capacity, it was not at that stage at all the policy of the faculty, is I started to accommodate English-speaking students at different time slots. They would still be in class, and then I would go in on a Sunday afternoon or on a Saturday or before a test or an exam, and I would repeat the whole class in English. That's one example. The other one is I am currently mentoring students. I'm currently mentoring an NGAP student from, it's in a governmental program. He is a student of Venda. I'm also mentoring one of the secretaries at the court, Avelani from Venda. She is my own LLM student, and she also took part, before she was appointed as a secretary, she was part of a mentoring program in Potchefstroom. I mentored her. So the big yes, and then I'm an adjunct professor at Venda. I became involved in a voluntary capacity. I'm not being remunerated for the work that I do there, in my capacity as an adjunct professor. So what I would do is, like in 2017, for example, I went to Venda and then I assist them in, say for instance, they don't have a module like road accident fund compensation. Then I would go in and for 2 days I would do a lecture on road accident fund compensation for those students at that university. I don't know if I should continue.
No, thanks. I'm very fine, Prof.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Honorable Nyambi. Minister.
Thank you. Afternoon, Prof.
Afternoon. Oh, there you are, sir. Yes, and I know you are an alumni of Venda.
Yes, I
Yes.
am. Yeah.
Yes.
You are basically, you are my product.
No, I am, Prof. I can see that you do take some effort to do some community work.
I'm sorry, sir. It's difficult to hear you.
Sorry. I can see that you do take some effort or make some time to do work, mentoring and so forth. Do you also perhaps, for example, help the communities that did land claims who are struggling to access water and so forth? Because that is the biggest challenge that they have, and also the mining communities which are struggling to enforce their rights with the DMR and the mines themselves.
Yes. Now, sir, unfortunately, I've never been approached by any of those community for assistance. I was only once approached by the State Attorney's Office, and that was in the Session matter, but that was not specifically directed at giving advice to a specific community. No, I haven't been approached.
Okay. With maybe lastly, what do you think? I just want to extend on the question that the Chief Justice asked you on the issue of the water rights to Cape Town.
Yes.
What do you think the state? What do you think makes the states to fail to implement or enforce some of these rights that are clearly apparent and they are in the legislation, like in the water rights, in the MPRDA, and the various legislations that we have in terms of ensuring that they become reality and enforceable?
Thank you. And you want an honest answer?
Yes.
I have for a long time been thinking about that. Why isn't anything happening?
Yes.
And then I did a course. It was an online course on sustainable development. I can't remember exactly now who the hosts of this course was. And they said something and I said, that is the problem. So it is my honest opinion that there must be a much greater effort to train and educate the officials who must do the work. And one of the remarks that was made in that specific course was the only officials, and I'm generalizing now, and I really hope that I'm not stepping onto anybody's toes, but usually the only officials in any state department who are really properly trained are the officials from the revenue services. Because state departments know that the better the training of the people from the revenue services, the more revenue and the more taxes they will
Generate more
generate.
revenue.
Thank you. And I also think, and it's not only the water department. In my honest view, I think the same can be said about the mineral and the department dealing with mining rights and prospecting rights. If the people who are doing the work are properly trained, then they will not be afraid to take the decisions that they need to take to ensure that progress happens.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Mbofu SC.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Prof.
Afternoon, Commissioner.
I'd like you to adopt me as your student. I'm very fascinated to find that there are people like you in this country. I wish I had known about you much earlier. More particularly because there's always this connection which is missed in this country. Well, firstly, I must just say it's not just the CJ that you agree with. I was one of the authors of the National Water Act, so you also agree with me. And you are quite right that the thrust of that act, if you cut all the legalese, was to nationalize water.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, would you agree that the same dispensation should apply, obviously with adaptations, in the question of the public or state ownership of particularly land and mineral rights? Because I see you've written on all three subjects. That's why I'm very fascinated about you.
Yes. So when I started with my master's degree, there was a lot of people who asked me, but why am I doing my research on this topic?
Nationalization.
Yes. And I said, because I see where this is going, because I can understand the rationale behind this. And after we have the National Water Act, we have the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, we have the most, I think almost all the NEMA-related acts have a similar component. And then there was a draft bill. I think it was the draft bill on agricultural land.
Yeah.
And the same notion was contained in the draft bill, with a little bit of a difference, because then it wasn't the state or the government who was listed as the custodian, it was the department, and that I think is wrong, because I think the responsibility must lie with the state or the department. But then the bill didn't pass in that way. So it is my personal opinion, and specifically because, as I have stated, I am of the view that we are in a position worldwide, globally, but particularly in South Africa, where it will be impossible to ensure that there are private property rights in resources for everybody. And therefore, if you read my book, you will see that what I actually say is that some principles make like a circle. And where a principle like the res omnium commune principle was initially used for resources like the sun and whatever, we are going to have to apply the same principles to usual resources like land if we as a nation want to benefit from it. I don't know if it answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. Well, I'm only allowed 2 questions, so I'm now going to ask you a double-barreled question.
Already given a preamble. That was your first question.
Yes.
You've asked 2 questions already.
Okay. Thank you, CJ. The second issue relates to exactly what you've just said, and I'll ask it very briefly. Do you believe that it is possible to achieve the ideal, the two fundamental ideals which underlie our Constitution, human dignity and equality, in a dispensation where there's private ownership of property, as we have described? One. Secondly is, as a person who's a Christian, do you think that a person can be a true Christian and still believe in the private ownership of the God-given assets like land, water, and minerals?
I don't know if that is a very fair question. So you will note that I wrote an article once on the Christian perspective of private property. And I think you have to regard that as, why are we on earth? And we are on earth as custodians of the resources on earth. And I think depending on particular needs and depending on particular periods in history, your perspective of that might change. Because if you really look at where the concept of private property developed, in the countries where it developed, it actually developed because people regarded themselves as the custodian of the resources, and the motivation that was behind the development was sought in private property. So that is how I am going to answer that question.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Singh.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. Good afternoon, Professor.
Afternoon, Commissioner.
I am looking at your questionnaire, in particular, Section 9, particulars of community and other organizations of which you
Yes.
served. And there's a long list, and it's commendable.
Yes.
I must say I'm a bit disappointed, though, that you've discontinued membership of some of them,
Yes.
in particular the Environmental Law Association.
Yes.
Because I have a passion for environment. But my question relates to, I don't know whether you were an advisor or a member of Solidarity, the trade union,
Yes.
and you discontinued your membership in 2017.
17, yes.
For how long were you a member, and why were you a member of a trade union?
Okay. Can I start with the question pertaining to the Environmental Law Association? I actually didn't know that I discontinued my membership. I thought my membership fees were annually paid by the secretary of the law firm and of the law faculty. And when I inquired about when I was drafted the questionnaire, she told me, oh no, but the last membership fees that was paid in, I think, in 2012. So to be honest, I had to say, well, I discontinued my membership. You will see that I have launched a branch of the Environmental Law Association in the Limpopo province at the function of the University of Venda in 2017. So to lay that to rest. Yes, I was a member of Solidarity, and I was a member for about, I think, I joined them in 2016. And I discontinued my membership in 2017. I joined for a purely personal reason, and I think that you would like to know what the reason is. Okay. I don't know, but I think you would have seen from my resume that my husband is a minister of the Reformed Church. And in our capacity as a minister, and I'm a minister's wife, I have some responsibilities towards that in that capacity. And we are often approached by people who have financial difficulties and who are in dire financial need. And when we can't help them ourselves, we usually go to the church structure to see whether we could find the necessary assistance there. sometimes the problem is so extensive that you cannot find the necessary assistance there. And then I actually fell back on a skill that I've learned in academia, and that is the importance of networking and to use the sources that you have access to. Now, Mr. Flip Buys from Solidarity, and I was at the university at the same time, and we were members of the SRC. So we came to know each other quite well. And then our paths crossed. We all went in our own direction. And then we met again when I was on the council of the Northwest University. And he was already by that time, Solidarity was up and going, and they have a project, Help in the Hand. But they have the project Help in the Hand, and it is a project that tried to assist people who are in need. So in this particular instance, the request was or pertained to a young woman. She was an orphan, and she was a mentally disabled woman. And she was in a center in Potchefstroom while she was a child being educated in the EAS Legrandsie Center. And then after she finished her career there, she wanted to go to Amelia. It is a center for mentally disabled adults. Unfortunately, she couldn't be accommodated there. There was no financial assistance for that. And she was moved to an institution in Klerksdorp. Unfortunately, I can't remember what the name of the institution was. And it didn't go well with her there. She was not well cared after, to the extent that she later removed herself from the center, and she was then taken care of in an old age home. And that is when this came to my attention. And I do not know, people who do not usually have contact with mentally disabled people will not know, but a mentally disabled person has specific and unique needs. And I really wanted to try to get her into a place that could cater for her needs. And that was Amelia, because that is the center where she had a security, it's the center where she grew up. And although Amelia takes state patients, at that stage, the quota of state patients was full. And if we wanted her to be admitted, we had to pay the financial, we had to contribute as a private patient. So I discussed this with Mr. Buys. And through his contacts, he arranged for the necessary subsidy and funds, and it was actually an amount that they paid to Amelia to accommodate her. And then I really felt very grateful for Mr. Buys' contribution, and particularly for the work that Help in the Hand did in this scenario. And I joined Solidarity so that the contribution that I could make was a minor financial contribution per month. I, however, could not see my membership through because it was in the same period. I think there were two cases that really got the news. The one was, if I remember correctly, the street names of Tshwane, and the other one was the language policy of the University of the Free State. Now, Solidarity is very vocal about their views and perceptions, and I could not, unfortunately, not reconcile myself with that. So I went to Mr. Buys because we know each other. We get along quite well. You don't need to agree with someone on everything to get along with him. And I explained to him that I am not going to continue with my membership. And that is what happened.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you. We have Commissioner Fourie and Prof. S-E-U-S-U-E. Colleagues?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's just one thing that I think. Sorry, I have to take up one matter. Thanks. But I also follow the US and the ESC. Goeiemiddag.
Goeiemiddag.
I've really enjoyed your interview up to now. It was
Thank you.
like a bit of a fresh breath in this room. But I also have to take up something with you.
Yes.
Your academic strengths, I think, have been exposed very positively But there seems to be in the comments from the law
Yes.
bodies a threat that runs through.
Yes.
It's from the Black Lawyers Association, it's from the GCB. And I must say, I practice at the seat of the Gauteng High Court. And one hears colleagues speak
Yes.
and comment, rightly or wrongly. And that follows that same threat that practically and procedurally you are still battling.
Still.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, what concerns me, and you come from a academic background, and one can understand that to an extent, but one might assume, let's assume the comments from the law bodies
Yes.
and the colleagues are correct. I'm not
Yes.
saying it is, I'm just referring to
Yes,
it.
I'm going to respond to that.
You can respond to it, and I'm not saying that personally because I have no personal knowledge of appearing before
Yes.
you. If I heard correctly, you acted for 38 weeks or something like
48.
that. 48 up
Yes,
to
it's
now.
actually 50 now, but it was 48 years.
Yeah. And on the assumption that these comments are hold water, one would possibly have thought that that might have been remedied or addressed to a certain extent by now.
Yes.
Firstly, do you regard the comments and the criticism purely from a practical
Of
and
course.
procedural side of view as correct or as fair?
Yes.
And if so, I would like you to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Well, I was expecting that question. I mean, I would have been foolhardy not to expect that question after receiving particularly the comments from the GCB. I did not read the comments from the Black Lawyers Association to be so negative because they actually point out that I have little practical experience, litigation experience, but then they emphasize, but the member is here, and if I understood it not correctly, he can correct me. Commissioner Fourie, I think it would definitely have assisted me in responding to this question if I knew whether these remarks were made after or during my first acting stint or later acting stints. Because I was actually also expecting a question pertaining to the challenges that I experienced while acting since coming from academia. And in my first acting stint, and particularly the first 3 weeks of my first acting stint, I did perceive challenges. And I think in a sense it was more a matter of me being uncertain in this new position. Because what I did do, I knew when I received the call that I could come and act, that I had to get abreast of specifically procedural law. I mean, I have no issue about the substantive law at all. And I bought myself the Superior Court, Erasmus Superior Court practice, and it became like a Bible to me. To the extent that what happened, and I can give one example, is if, say for instance, I was in the unopposed motion court, and there was an issue about the service of documents to a State Department. When I prepared the unopposed application, I would see that this particular motion was only served on the State Attorney. And then I would look at Erasmus and I would see that Rule 49 has been amended, and it now reflects that service must be in accordance with an applicable legislation, and the applicable legislation pertaining to state departments is the State Liability Act. So I would come into court and I would address that specific issue with the advocate who is representing his client.
Sorry,
And
I
he-
don't want to interrupt you,
Yes.
but we are pressed for time.
Okay, but you asked for an explanation.
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
reason
But
why
I would
then-
like you to come to the conclusion
Okay,
as
the
to what you say.
Okay. The conclusion is, if there were challenges, fair challenges, it would have been in the first acting stint. But I did my utmost best to ensure that I stay abreast of the procedural law as it is and the amendments that took place. And I am firmly of the view that in the experience that I have gained through this whole 48 weeks to date, that if there was questions, that questions would have been answered.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to explain so that you don't think I just make this up.
Prof. S.E. U.E. So you have, so you don't understand our coded language anymore.
no.
You are not here.
No.
It looks like I suspect Commissioner Malema is also unfamiliar. Commissioner, is still following? Okay. Are you withdrawing your interest,
No,
or
I
is
want
it irresistible because
just
of your views on the land issue?
No, the land issue is sufficiently covered, and I can hear why certain people are asking other questions. They are disturbed by nationalization and land and solidarity. Now, the quick one is just, is there no temptation to want to write a PhD when you write judgments? Because academics, ordinarily, when they are given an opportunity to write,
Yes.
you may be tempted to want to write a lengthy judgment and put the academic, perspective and
Yes.
argument in the judgment. Are you not tempted from time to time, or find yourself in that conflicted situation?
So I haven't really found myself in that conflicting situation. What I did attempt to do was, when I dealt with a particular issue of law, I tried to expand on the legal principles that applied to that particular issue so that people who could read the judgment would understand where I come from and what I apply.
Thank you, Prof. You're excused. Oh, I don't have you here. Anyway, okay.
Oh, sorry. I thought you saw me. No problem at all, Chief Justice. Prof? No, of course. Yes, I'm part of the arrangement. Yes, but irresistible. Professor, good afternoon.
Afternoon, ma'am.
There's been an objection.
Yes.
And I would like you to please assist us with that.
Yes.
It pertains to the Chongweni matter.
Yes.
And what's been said there is that you failed to apply the plus connivence test
Yes.
properly.
Yes.
And there seems to be a problem about signing of an
Yes.
extempore judgment or something like that. Would you like to enlighten us on that?
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Please.
I don't know whether you have received it, but I have replied in writing to that comment or to that objection, particularly because I regarded that as a very important aspect and I would actually expect that the Commission would take that into consideration. Now, I don't know if you want me just to...
Just briefly, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't want to go into the merits of the objection because that is an aspect that will have to be dealt with by the Supreme Court of Appeal if the Advocate Chongweni is eventually granted leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. If, however, you read the judgment that the complainant attached to the complaint, you will see that I know what the Plascon-Evans rule is and that I applied it. The issue about the extempore the judgment was given extempore.
And as I
And
understand
then-
the position, you're supposed to sign the transcribed
I'm
version,
saying-
and there's been a toing and froing in
Yes.
that regard. What's the situation,
The
please?
situation was, the short answer is I was never informed that there was a judgment that I had to be signed. The reason that I think is for the fact that the emails with that judgment attached to it was sent to an email address that do not exist. That is the short answer, but I have provided a longer answer, and I'm sure it's part of the documents. Otherwise, I can just
Thank you,
leave
Professor.
mine here.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
you.
You're excused, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.